We were on the way home from Las Vegas, about a half mile from where we're standing at the moment.
I just happened to look out the rearview mirror and just saw something coming up from behind us. And it looked like it wasn't
normal.
And I kept saying, what the hell is that?
And this thing floated above our heads, doing about 30 miles an hour.
That's a good word, float. Yeah.
Floated, yeah, it floated. Or had to have been defying gravity, or it was a lighter-than-air craft. I don't know. But it was triangular. It was monstrous. The moon and the stars went away, and there it was above us. And we stood and watched it go across the valley and head toward the mountains.
My name is Rosita Dixon, and I'm 75 years old. I have been living here in Hamilton for the last 42 years, but before that, I lived in Puerto Rico. And while I was there, it was in 1971, I was coming home from the movies with my mom, and it was a beautiful night. I left my mother at the entrance of the house, and I went to park the car in the garage, and when I came back, I was looking at the sky. It was so beautiful. And all of a sudden, I noticed, there it is, just sitting there in the sky was this triangular object. And it was just, I could see the tree, the lights of the street reflected on. So it was above the tree line, just above my house. And I couldn't understand what it was because it didn't move. It was just standing there. It was not hovering. It was nothing. It was just there. And there was no noise, absolute quiet. And all of a sudden, I'm very scared. And I'm looking at it. And like I said, there was no markings. Obviously, that rectangular shape was a spaceship of some kind. There were no markings on it except at the top. There were little arches of like blue light coming out. Obviously, windows were around the triangular shape that I could see because it was so low. All of a sudden, it went boom to the right, and it just disappeared. I was speechless. I ran upstairs and I told my mother, I wish you had stayed down there with me so you could have seen it. So she said, well, let's call the airport and see if there's any airplanes or anything going on, because we were close to where the airplanes came into Isla Verde Airport. And I called and I talked to somebody in the tower. And he said, nothing has been in and out of the airport in the last 15 minutes. But please give me your address and your phone number so we can reach you and talk about this some more. And I did. And about 3 days later, I got from the U.S. government, big manila envelope, this many papers in it. It was a questionnaire. A very detailed questionnaire about what I had seen. Could I identify the shape? Which I could. It was there. There were no pictures of it, but there was a drawing of it. And they had cigar shapes and round ones and all kinds of different shapes. Triangular, it was there. So I was supposed to describe my experience in a lot of detail because it was many, many pages. I filled it out right away, sent it back, and never heard from them again. And that's a story that I tell all the time. Sometimes people laugh at me, but I don't care. I saw what I saw, and it's not going to change me. That's what I saw.
And then it was heading straight north.
Las Vegas journalist Caitlin White was in the backyard of her southeast Las Vegas home last year when she saw a dark behemoth fly over. She drew this picture.
It was triangular shaped and there were rectangular reflectors. There was no interior light coming out of it at all. And by the time it got out of sight, I bet it was 5 to 8 minutes. It was really slow. And I couldn't figure out how it was staying in the air.
White called the police, who connected her to Nellis Air Force Base, which is the direction the triangle seemed headed.
And the man said, I don't want you to talk about this anymore. You're not going to talk about this anymore and you're going to forget it. once again, I said, look, Betty, I'm not drinking. I'm not on drugs. Something is headed for your base. And then he got really terse and he said, ma'am, I'm going to tell you one more time, and this is the last time I'm going to tell you, you will forget what you saw and you won't tell anybody. And at that point, I was freaked. I didn't know what to do.
I noticed a yellowy orangey light just to my side there, and I thought, oh, there's no street light out there. I thought it was a street light at first, so I sort of did a double take, and I saw 3 orangey yellow lights, and they were sort of moving in towards each other. These lights sort of moved in and until they disappeared, and then they seemed to be replaced by just random dots of light, which were sort of moving. So I would imagine that they were all on a huge craft that was actually turning, and then these lights were coming towards me, and as it come towards me and it took shape, it was a triangle, a big huge triangle with the lights all the way around the edge, and it went over my flat, and it ended up me out of my flat window with my mobile phone trying to get a photograph of the thing.
Were the lights just along the sides, or were they on the corners? Just
I'd say no more than 8 on each side.
Right, okay.
I think there were fewer on the back side of it, and there was one red one in the centre.
One red one in the centre.
Yeah.
3 white lights with a red flashing light. But what struck me most was it seemed to be still. It seemed to be completely still. It was like maybe 4 to 5 houses high, if you get me. But what I noticed is it was sort of rotating like that. That's why these lights looked. That's why these lights looked like they were going into each other, but they weren't, because they were like a solid object.
I looked up first and I saw this massive, great big black triangle sitting in there, and it wasn't. It seemed to be absorbing the light. You could see it against the light pollution. This thing, it's the size of it's massive, like a great big football field.
So it was blacker than the surrounding sky.
It was blacker than the sky.
Right.
That's how we could see it.
And give me an estimate of size, Dean.
Well, it must have been like bigger than a football field.
It must have been at least a football field in size. It was huge. The height, I think, was about 3 or 4 houses high.
Right.
Heading towards north-northwest from south-southeast.
Right. And then it kind of moved backwards towards me, if you know what I mean. But like really slow and smooth, and that's why I knew that's not an aeroplane, if you know what I mean. It was like really slow and smooth, like backwards like that, and then it moved forwards like that way, and then it sort of just did that a few times and then just headed off.
Right.
But there were no sound at all. That's what was weird.
The craft was going like that,
right,
and turning round. Eventually those lights on the back disappeared, and I could just see it like a cluster of lights, and the cluster of lights were moving, and then they all started coming towards me like that, and as it got closer and started going above, I could see then it was a triangle.
It was absolutely massive, this thing. It had a white point of light. At each point there was a white piercing light, and in the centre was a small cluster of red and orange, like honeycomb arrangement of lights at the centre. It's just sitting there. I didn't see it move.
Nothing holding it up.
Nothing holding it up. I was looking. Yeah,
Did you hear any noise from it?
No. I mean, if there was a noise, I probably couldn't hear it because of the engine.
1 o'clock in the morning, I took the dog out into the garden for his last roll around. Far off in the distance I could see lights flashing. I thought it was a helicopter because of the speed it was travelling at. But the lights were not as a helicopter normally is. They weren't strobing, but it made no sound. And I'm thinking, well, what the hell is this? And this one leading light with the 2 following, and it didn't split up, it was just one. It appeared to be just one solid object.
It headed off towards Ackworth, which if you go to Ackworth you eventually end up in Rotherham,
right,
if you keep going. And then a few days later, that's when I saw that thing in the newspaper,
right,
which is like...
Now before we go to that, just give us an estimate of the distance and the size.
If it were about 5 houses high, and then probably about 600 to 800 metres away from me.
Right. You've estimated in your witness statement...
About 30 metres-ish, if...
Right. in size?
Yeah, like length like that, 30 metres.
Right. So your sighting was on the 20th of October.
Yeah.
And then that was a Wednesday. The following Monday,
I went back to work. I worked on nights at the time.
And there was a sighting of a UFO in Rotherham.
Yeah, in Rotherham, and it was a black triangle.
Right.
Apparently, they said. It just says, baffled residents helplessly shouted at the triangular craft as it crept above the South Yorkshire town.
And of course it just didn't make a sound, so I couldn't place it.
What sort of speed do you think it was travelling at?
40 miles an hour? It wasn't fast.
Eerily, it looked just like an object spotted over Belgium in 1990, which so spooked authorities that F-16 fighter jets were scrambled to intercept it. That were in 1990, and they've put a picture of that one as well, which looks pretty much dead on what I saw, to be honest.
Right.
This object was coming over the top of the houses, and I could see the red lights were starting at the front of the object and flashing down the sides of the object. So this was a head-on view, and clearly wasn't anything that I could recognise.
Right.
So as it drew closer, I could make out it was a flat triangular shape.
It just maintained the same speed. It didn't alter. But looking at it from underneath, I was seeing a light there. Is that in frame? A light there and a light there. About 3/4 football pitch.
Right. All right. Okay. So
is a rough.
Pretty big then.
Yes, it was pretty big.
And what I was seeing was red lights flashing sequentially down the craft from the front to the back, the full length of the object, say about 10 lights. And again, as it started coming closer, I was now more looking side on, and the height of this thing was probably around 500 metres, I'm guessing, so not very high at all, but certainly high enough above the houses. But as the first object came into closer and came side on, a second object identical to the first one appeared underneath it. And
I noticed that the sky around the lights started to sort of wobble, in effect, like a rippling effect, around the outside of what turned out to be a triangular shaped craft. And once it started to ripple, you could see this object materialising. It was just like Star Trek, like decloaking right in front of our eyes around the lights. Once we realised that it was a craft there, the craft floated its nose into the air. Now I say floated, it manoeuvred like no other craft I've seen. I've been in the aircraft industry, I've been to air shows, I know what craft look like when they move about. This thing was floating. It looked like it was underwater, like a submarine.
A size, again guessing, is 20 to 30 metres long, the objects. Certainly not huge like some reports have said of football field size objects. It certainly wasn't that big, but larger than your average two-seater plane or what have you.
Basically there were just these 4 big lights along the back, and like I say, they weren't parallel to the ground, they were tilted at an angle. Now I also noticed during the course of there was a little light off to one side. It turns out that would be the one underneath the nose at the front, but at this point we didn't know that. We could just see 4 lights at the back and 1 under the front. And it was at this point that the triangle tilted up in the air, but it rose, like I say, like a submarine underwater. Now once it did that, we could see on top of the surface all these lines interlocking, looked like girders.
Any noise at all?
No, and again, this was the thing that drew on me then, was that I couldn't hear a thing.
Right. And what sort of speed?
And again, the speed was most definitely slower than your average airspeed for any aircraft that I've seen. So they were almost, you could say drifting, but there was no bobbing motion. They were on a very set, steady course.
This is showing the central white core of the craft, and I've tried to show here how the top and the bottom rolled over like this hovercraft skin effect or pastry on a pie. But the thing I remember about this particular view is there was no nuts and bolts, no rivets, no welding. It almost been sympathetically put together.
As they went past, I noticed behind them, separated by a few hundred metres again, was another pair of identical objects.
And were they like directly one below the other, or were they offset? So
they weren't offset, they were directly above each other.
All right.
So one pair drifted past, then another pair, and I counted 4 pairs, 8 craft.
8 craft. But what I would say is we stood there, and in the distance flying away from us was the largest flying craft I've ever seen in my life, bearing in mind my aircraft experience from the past. It was a huge craft. It was the size of a football field. It got 4 red lights at the back again, but this time on the enormous wings there was a white light at the end of each wing. It wasn't strobing, it was just shining. It was shining up the surface of the craft on both sides, and this huge thing was flying away from us. Right. We could only assume that the small craft had gone back to the larger craft.
Just before they went out of view, I was getting a slight angle of the back end of the craft. And again, that was just flat, slightly different again, no red lights on the back, but there were 2 squares of purple light. And again, not a colour that I've ever seen on any aircraft.
Right.
Very distinctive, bright purple, but they were dimmer than the red flashing lights. Right. And I can only guess that they were part of the propulsion system.
Right. But were they making any noise, or was there any flame or anything?
No, there was no flame. No, couldn't see any flame or gas coming out the back. It was just light.
Right. And any noise at all? Absolutely none whatsoever. And more importantly, there were no smells. You couldn't smell anything. There was no fuel being burnt from like a conventional engine.
It's either military or aliens, isn't it? And that's it.
Right. Why are they flying it over between Pontefract and Rotherham?
God knows.
Yeah. That's the answer. That's the question that I'm addressing. Yeah.
Why would they do it?
Whether it's a secret, some sort of secret aircraft that's been developed, or it's of some other origin, I don't know. But immediately you think spaceships, aliens. I would personally think it could be something like an aircraft of from us.
Secret human.
That's
craft.
right. Yeah.
So why would it be sitting there just hovering above the traffic?
Well, maybe I tend to think like a moth to a candlelight.
Obviously something completely unlike our known military aircraft.
So it is an airspace that I know is used by the military.
Right.
Not commercial aircraft that low.
Right. ET or military?
Well, I can only guess that it's most likely come from ET, whether it's ET or our military now, or another government's military. Anybody's guess. That's speculation, isn't it?
I mean, some people have said to me, was it perhaps the stealth fighter or the stealth bomber? Well, at that distance, I mean, this thing was only like 100 feet away from us. The stealth fighter, the F-117 weighs, I think it's 3,800 pounds, but it's only got 2 engines which produce 30,000 pounds of thrust. It hasn't got enough, but if it had 38,000 pounds of thrust, it would have to stand on its end with engines on full blast just to hover. This craft was not doing that. This craft was manoeuvring around with no noise whatsoever, in the most peculiar fashion.
Right. So if it was a stealth aircraft, it's using a propulsion system that hasn't been disclosed yet, presumably.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. My own personal feeling from the whole experience that it's definitely not one of ours. I've never seen anything quite like it. Now, if this is a secret project from the military, what are they doing in the Leicestershire countryside, jumping out on people, driving along in the cars? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
The craft seemed to be in no panic to get away from us. After the event, not prior to it, because it's my first experience of anything paranormal. I have had other experiences. That makes, for me, 100% certain that this is not a man-made object.
Or between 10 o'clock and 10:30, and I was coming down the dual carriageway from a place called Goodrich, which is about a mile outside of Monmouth, or 2 miles. And as I came up to the traffic lights on the dual carriageway, kind of parallel to the centre of town, in Monmouth, I noticed these 2 balls of light, what looked like 2 balls of light, hovering above the trees just to the right of the motorway, maybe 40 metres away from me, because they were to the right of the motorway and just above some trees that are in Chippenham Park, which is right next to the motorway. So they were set back a little from the motorway and above these trees in the park. So I was looking at them while the traffic lights were red, and the traffic lights turned green, so I headed down the motorway and I started to wind down my window so I could get a bit better look at these things. So as I drove past them with the window wound down, I was literally looking straight across the dual carriageway
at these balls of light hovering above the trees. They were a matter of meters above the trees, maybe 5 meters. And they were 2 balls of light. One of them was below the other and slightly smaller than the other. So they were both roughly basketball size. I think the larger one was slightly larger than a basketball, and then the smaller one below it was maybe the size of a football or a little smaller than that, so about 2/3 the size of the one above it. And the smaller one had a large spike sticking out the right-hand side of it. I mean, seeing these 2 balls of light is bizarre enough, but seeing the spike coming out of one side of it, and it was kind of protruding out of one side, a sharp spike. Both balls of light appeared to be kind of fizzing as if they were unstable, and I actually wanted to get a bit of distance from them. So I carried on driving while I was looking at this spike coming out one side. It looked like it was actually growing out, like it was extending in length a little bit. But I didn't kind of stop there to find out what was going on because I didn't feel all that safe. So I carried on driving up to the slip road, pulled into the slip road, got out of the car, turned back to look at these balls of light, and now there were no longer 2 balls of light in there where they were. They were 2 large black triangles, and they were right next to each other, except that one was set back slightly from the other as if they were in a staggered formation. And they were literally in exactly the same place where I'd seen the balls of light 10 seconds earlier. It must have taken me about 10 seconds to drive the car to the slip road and pull over and get out, maybe 15 seconds.
Can you give an estimate of size of these triangles?
Yeah, in the way I explained them on the night when I got home and wrote it all down, was that they were the size of each triangle was roughly the size of the roof of the petrol garage at the bottom end of Monmouth. Right. And that petrol garage has got 12 pumps. So you can imagine 12 cars parked underneath roughly each triangle. You know, if you'd squeeze all the cars together, you could fit about 12. And they were kind of dark grey, not really black. You know, you look at the stealth aircraft and that sort of thing. You look at the B-2 stealth bomber, even in daylight, in some of those air shows that you can look at on YouTube. It's like pitch black. These things were more slightly grey, so a very dark grey, but not totally black.
Can you remember any lighting on them at all?
So if you imagine that this was actually a triangular shape, and this is the back end, and the triangle point would be at the front end. If this is the back end of the triangles, there were 4, and they were obviously flat like this as they went along. There were 4 blue oblong-shaped lights along the back end in a row, and they were quite fat and quite prominent, and I could see they actually bulged out. Just you know, there was a bulge to them. They weren't kind of inset, they were bulging out, and they were turquoise blue and quite large compared to all the other lights, which were spread over the rest of the bottom, the underside of the triangle, and there were about 10 other lights of different colours but in a pattern. So if there was a green light on one side, there'd be another one opposite it on the other side. So it was symmetrical layout of lights, but lots of different colours. So I'm thinking they were kind of yellow, definitely white. There was a white light on each point, but there were also on the other side yellow, red, green, and these blue ones is what I'm thinking. But the layout of the lights underneath was quite complex, so I don't remember the exact layout, even though I drew it a rough estimation of what it was in my Photoshop recreation that I did on my computer the night it happened. But the one that I remember, the lights that I remember, were 4 oblong shaped lights along the back end, which were very distinctive. And then as both of the triangles crossed over the motorway and they turned their back ends towards me, all of the lights changed to a white colour. All of the lights, as if someone just turned a dimmer switch and changed all the colours to white. Every single light on it faded to white on both triangles at exactly the same time. This was like these things were on rails, and they just went absolutely smoothly and perfectly exactly where they wanted to go, and there was no kind of a clue that they were, it wasn't like they were using air to keep them up. They were just went exactly, just like magnets, they went exactly where they wanted to go, and there was no kind of buffeting or moving up and down. And while they were hovering, it was like they were sat there on a rod, because they just did not move at all. But after about 5 to 10 seconds, they started to move across the motorway at about walking pace. It was quite slow how fast they moved. and I think it may have taken another 10 seconds for them to cross the motorway. As they went across the motorway, they actually extended in length. So they started off as equilateral triangles, pretty much identical to the other 2 times when I'd seen them, which we'll get into later. But as they crossed the motorway, the front was actually getting longer as it was moving slightly faster than the back end. In other words, they were elongating as they were moving. So by the time they got to about halfway across, they were now longer triangles, more like an arrowhead sort of shape than a equilateral triangle shape. They also went transparent, like the heat haze on a hot road. If you're looking at a hot road and you see this kind of rippling effect, it was like that sort of rippling effect, or looking at water when it's rippling. I could tell that they were still there, but they were transparent, and this lasted about half a second. It literally was like someone just pressed a button and then pressed it again at that sort of speed, as if, right, turn on invisibility, now turn it off again. So it was very quick, but it was quite distinct and quite obvious, and again, both of them did it at exactly the same time. So both triangles went ripply and then went solid again, and this was all as they were moving across the road. And now one of them heads up the motorway towards Ross-on-Wye. It seemed to accelerate, but it didn't shoot off at really high speed. They were going at walking pace, and then it just started to pick up speed as it went off into the distance. And the other one had turned its back to me, and it went away a little while, and then for 10-20 meters, and then turned right and followed the Wye Bridge straight over the river and headed over towards Wylesham. And interestingly, I've got some newspaper clippings. Other people saw the black triangles on that night, and one of them was a guy who lives in Wylesham. I spoke to him on the phone about it afterwards. But the first sighting of these triangles happened in late 2007, and I've got the exact date. I'm thinking it was around 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. It was in the winter, so it was already dark. And as I was driving down the road, good visibility on the ground, but there was a thick layer of fog above, and I saw these 2 balls of light dropping out of this cloud layer, and they headed down behind the housing estate near my sister's house. So I pulled the car up. I thought I might as well just park up at my sister's place. So I pulled around into her car park, got out of the car, looked back in the direction where I'd seen these balls of light dropping behind the estate, and lo and behold, out from the rooftops, from behind the rooftops, came these 2 black triangles. They were equilateral in size. They appeared to be quite small, maybe the size of a single-man jet fighter. At the largest, about that size. They seemed to be relatively high, maybe the height of Big Ben, and they both flew over my sister's house. They had white lights on each point, and no other visible lights apart from a light right in the centre, which was flashing, and this light was also white. So the flashing light on it, plus the fact that this all seemed a bit too good to be true, I put it down to being some sort of aircraft that I'd not seen before. But I knew deep down that these could be black triangles, because I'd heard of black triangles before. Okay. And they were clearly triangular shaped. I didn't hear any noise. So yeah, and they just headed off towards the centre, in the direction of the centre of Monmouth, and that was that.
I have had similar accounts, in particular a guy called Eric Goring in Lincolnshire described almost exactly what you've just described. It didn't have the spike coming out of the orb though, but it had the materializing effect and the balls of light which seemed to turn into a triangle, which sounds completely bizarre. Yeah. But maybe it's a stealth craft, maybe it's ET, who knows, but thanks very much.
Indeed. Thanks very much, Rich.